now, so we're having a bit of technical difficulties. We have just one speaker who is trying to connect to the call, and after that, we're going to be starting the webinar immediately.
Okay.
All right, we seem to have managed. Hi, Claire, welcome. We're live on Facebook already, so we're starting the webinar just now. So first of all, I would like to thank you all as our speakers for joining us for this webinar. And I'd like to thank everyone who is watching us live on Facebook. This is the first installation in our webinar series on topic. And this is an initiative between KSU and 21 other student organizations. I am Yasmin Alul, I am KSU Student Affairs Officer, and I will be moderating the discussion today. As a bit of a background on the topic which we have on the agenda today, today's topic is saving the ODZ, and we are taking on this topic in light of the construction industry being blamed for the ever-decreasing rural areas in Malta. With hundreds of ODZ applications being approved every year, some of which have attracted national outcry even, the balance between sustainability and planning requires considering and revising. And that's basically what we'll be tackling in this webinar today. Saving the ODZ is a collaboration between SACHES and between KSU, SACHES, and S-Cubed, which are, so SACHES and S-Cubed are two student organizations whose diverse fields of studies coincide on the matter. With us today, we have an interesting panel lined up with individuals very passionate on the topic. These include Tim Greck, Wayne Flask, Sandra Ketkuti, Claire Borch, and Jacques Borch-Bartet. So I'd like to, before we start and jump into the discussion immediately, I'd like to give a brief introduction on our speakers with us today. Introducing our first panelist for this webinar is, so we have Tim Greck, who is a 21-year-old graduate with a Bachelor's of Commerce degree in Marketing and Public Policy. During his time as a student, Tim participated in and organized a number of environmental-related protests and actions, as well as joined the environmental NGO Extinction Rebellion Malta. So Tim basically feels that Malta does not treat the environment to the standards it deserves, and this is the reason behind his activism. Moving on to our second panelist, we have Wayne Flask, who has been a member of Movement Graffiti since 2019 now. He is also the author of the satirical novel Capitali and has experience in theatre as a playwright for various different plays. Our third speaker is Sandra Ketkuti, who is the chairman of Property Malta Foundation, a public-private partnership between the Malta Developers Association and the Government of Malta. This was set up in 2017 with the aim of promoting real estate investment in Malta. Mr. Ketkuti, also worth mentioning, is the president and founder of the Malta Developers Association, which now represents virtually all property developers in Malta. As our fourth panelist, we have Perit Jacques Borch-Bartet, who is a part-time member of staff in the Department of Spatial Planning and Infrastructure of the Faculty for Built Environment and the Director of Practice at AP Valletta. Jacques is also a former member of the Planning Appeals Board and has been involved on a number of advisory committees on planning policy. It is worth noting that he has a long-standing research interest in governance for environmental quality and projects concerned with place quality and mobility. Finally, our fifth and last speaker, we have Claire Bonnello, who is a lawyer. She's been practicing law for over 20 years now and is self-employed. She is a legal consultant for local environment NGOs and has led several environmental and information campaigns. Claire serves as a chairperson of the Scientific Advisory Council on the Environment. a national advisory entity, and joined with providing professional views for sustainable, professional, and holistic legislation. So this was just a brief introduction to the speakers which we have with us today. I will go ahead and start with the discussion by asking the first question that we have for today. I will address this question specifically to Sandro, so maybe he can, given his expertise, he can explain a bit better. I want to start off easy and just ask, what are outside development zones, and what is the process behind building on these areas?
Mela, jina kif għatilna fil-bidu tal-introduction tiegħek qabel ma tħannet fuq dan il-webinar, nistgħu nitkellmu bil-Malti u xejn.
Iva, jekk tixtieq titkellem bil-Malti, tista' titkellem bil-Malti.
Qabel il-1990s, qabel ma ġew il-Boston temporary provision schemes, sar effort tal-pajjiż biex outside development zone suppost kellu ma jinbenix ħlief għal national interest projects. Il-imbagħad ovvjament mill-1992 sa 2006 ġew ippreparati u diskussi il-pjanijiet lokali biex setgħu jiġu stabiliti areas fejn jista' jsir development u l-kumplament ma kellux isir development. Aħna bit-twelid tagħna ġifieri minn 10 snin u law kemm ilna mwafqa l-NDA dejjem insistejna u qbilna konna konsistenti illi m'għandniex l-artijiet fiż-żona agrikola. Ġifieri il-policy tal-NDA hija lew biżżejjed iktar minn biżżejjed u biktar fejn jistgħu jiġu sviluppat proġetti għal residenzjali, kummerċjali, industrijali and what have you fiż-żona tal-iżvilupp. M'għandniex għalfejn inkomplu innaqru iktar art fiż-żona barra mill-iskema. Jiġifieri l-ODZ illum sfortunatament rajna industriji bħal fejn aħjina għandek il-lukandi li f'dawn l-20 ta' snin minkejja tal-effett. ċertu lukandiera iddeċidew illi jistgħu jinvestu fiż-żona agrikola fl-ODZ. Kellna supermarkets, per eżempju, illi jingħataw permessi fl-ODZ. Kellna old people's homes illi iddeċidew illi ituhom il-permessi fl-ODZ. Kellna wkoll proġetti oħra, kellna diversi proġetti, kellna skejjel illi iddeċidew illi l-iskola tista' tinbena fuq ODZ. Kellna wkoll l-iskuża tal-agricultural stores u l-iskużi tal-farms. Mbagħad wara ċertu żmien naraw li dawn il-farms jinqelbu residential. Dawn ma kollha policies li aħna ma naqblux magħhom. Id-developers tradizzjonali għalmenu xinti l-ewwel għadd li nirrappreżentaw id-developers kollha ma nisibx nixtiequ nirrappreżentaw l-iżviluppaturi kollha, però ħafna żviluppaturi ovvjament għandhom il-proprjetajiet li jkunu miltu, illi tkun ġiet għandhom u ma jkunux fil-mistier u jkunu qegħdin japplikaw certain policies. Hija l-awtorità tal-ippjanar illi tiddeċiedi fejn għandu jinbena u m'għandux jinbena. Hija sfortuna illi kemm ilhom itelqu l-Ingliżi minn Malta ma rajniex biżżejjed pjanar tajjeb u sostenibbli u kolli ngħid illi anke taħt il-gvern stess il-forward planning ma natax kasu u l-Planning Authority sempliċement ġiet regolatur fejn tipproċessa l-applikazzjonijiet, tiddeċiedi kif għandek tibni u kif ma tibnix, però fuq forward planning intera kollox marriħ u naħseb illi hawnhekk għandu bżonn isir sforz nazzjonali biex naraw kif il-forward planning jittejjeb.
Tajjeb ħafna. Allora jekk qed ngħidu li if we're saying that this term outside development zone, Sandra, thank you, you've just explained what it means. Is the term actually still, so this is a question addressed to everyone now, Is the term outside development zone still relevant if these areas are still being developed?
If I may start off the discussion. Really and truly, not really, because if we keep on developing in ODZ areas, then they're not really in ODZ area. And if we keep on developing, we will reach a certain point where there won't be any ODZ area to continue building on. So really and truly, it is just a mirage, you know. It's not really. It's there to just as a term, but it's not actually obeyed.
I would like to add something onto what Mr. Ketkouti said. First of all, I mean, this is quite unusual for me to admit that I am in agreement with Mr. Ketkouti on a number of issues. He's also mentioned the fact that there was no proper planning for a long number of years, that some policies simply did not work. And my biggest question, specifically once we're discussing ODZ and what is also the rural policy, which has been heavily criticized by almost everyone except for political parties in the last few years. Mr. Ketkouti himself was a member of a planning board tasked with the review of this policy. And after 6 months and even longer, Mr. Ketkouti was one of those people who effectively did nothing to improve things. We had a seat on this panel together with Alan Daydoun and Elizabeth Allul as well. Mr. Daydoun had eventually resigned because there was no progress being made on this advisory committee. It's true what Mr. Ketkouti is saying. There is bad planning. There is, I think, in my opinion, also malicious planning. And yet here we are wasting crocodile tears on loss of arable land, on the loss of ODZ, but people who had the power to do something did nothing about it. It's taken 6 years since the 2014 policy was actually put up for review. I think the review is a positive step, but there are still quite a few areas that need to be addressed. There are still a number of loopholes. And as we know, loopholes are what allow corruption in planning to fester. Loopholes are what allows the hideous level, the hideous design and the disproportionate size of certain buildings, not just in ODZ, but in everywhere. So if we are looking at a national effort to bring planning together to make something better out of the planning situation, people who are in power should stand up and take responsibility and also not hide behind loopholes. I think if this approach continues, where basically we're issuing one half-baked policy after the other, we're not going to go anywhere. And there are only a few people who stand to gain out of this, is the people who, for example, Mr. Ketkouti mentioned supermarkets, mentioned schools, mentioned national interest, which is another buzzword which when transposed into a policy becomes a gigantic loophole, because any minister or any person close to a minister can apply for any kind of development and claim that it is in the national interest, because national interest is not defined anywhere. It's not defined anywhere. So we have various issues at hand with planning. Yes, we should all come together and plan for reform, but eventually this thing of publishing half-baked reports to the benefit of a select few has to stop.
aħna naqblu ta' sorry nħabbu l-kelma, aħna naqblu ħafna għal is-surplus. U meta kunna fuq advisory committee kien hemm il-Dr. Bonnello wkoll magħna u naħseb li minnaħa ta' kull min kien hemm fuq dan l-advisory committee kollha taw input tajjeb ħafna. Aħna opinjoni nistgħu ngħidu, id-decision takers kollha qatt ma kollha u kien hemm ħafna mill-ta' proposti il-irnexxina naqblu fuqhom u ġifieri huwa il-politiku u hija l-policy maker illi għandu jiddeċidi mhux aħna. Aħna sempliċement qegħdin hemmhekk biex nesprimu l-opinjoni bħalma qed nagħmlu bħalissa. Ġifieri fuq il-prinċipji qegħdin naqblu. Id-developers m'għandhomx għalfejn jibnu fuq ODZ, mhix l-interess il-developer li jibnu fuq ODZ. Il-developer imur jixtri l-art xi 1,500-2,000 euro per square meter u anke iktar u ma naħsibx li huwa sew illi xi ħadd jitħalla jibni fuq ODZ meta l-prezz anke tal-art hemmhekk tiswa għall-agrikoltura. xi ħaġa li anke għall-ekonomija stess hija unhealthy u mill-aspett ambjent hija unhealthy u mill-aspett ekonomija tiddistorti għalek is-suq.
Well and good. Okay, the price argument makes sense, but it's definitely not the biggest concern when it comes to ODZ. I think the biggest concern is the repeated and structured loss of, for example, agricultural land and open spaces. To a number of issues, not just the building of private residences or agricultural stores. Also, there are still people, and a little side bracket, people who drafted these policies who still have active roles in government and in planning policy and acting as consultants to planning. And I think their contract should be reviewed if their track record is proven to be the drafting of several faulty policies. So they shouldn't be given a second chance to participate in other policy drafts. But I digress here in this case. I think there's also a huge pressure on ODZ areas, for example, from road building. And we know that whenever roads are passed through ODZ, that ODZ area is opened up to commercial interests. Let us also be careful of things that are banded as national importance or the upgrade of infrastructure, because all they are doing, they're upgrading areas for commercial interests to prosper and taking more and more important arable land from us, where they have a huge problem in farming. Even up to this morning, there were articles in the news describing how farmers will be hit by the loss of EU funding. It's one punch after the other that the agricultural sector is taking, and nobody except for a handful of NGOs is there to stick up for the rights of farmers, for our own food. So this is something which I think is very serious and goes beyond just the occasional fault in the policy. I think there's a concerted effort basically to steal as much land from ODZ as possible. Even Sunday, we've had another story about an ODZ supermarket in Burmarat. It's directly going to impact the livelihood of a farmer. Is going to take his land, is going to take his water reservoirs from him. And this goes on as if it were nothing. When are we going to stop?
Mela, Claire would like to add a comment on this. However, Claire is having some difficulties with her audio. So what we'll be doing is Claire will be speaking to me through her mobile and hopefully you will be able to hear her from my speaker.
Okay. Thank you, Yasmin, and sorry for this impromptu improvisation. What I would like to say about ODZ is this. It is a useful and accurate acronym. ODZ stands for Outside Development Zone. That means simply that it is not within the development zone to which specific policies apply. This does not mean that absolutely no building can be done on ODZ. However, specific limited buildings, usually related to rural activities. Okay. Now the problem in Malta is that there are several liberal policies which are being interpreted in a very discretionary and wide manner, and as a result, there is urbanization of the ODZ.
Thank you for your input on that matter. So if you don't have anything else to add sort of on this question, even though we've deviated a bit, but I think that this is very, very useful, and it will help us to sort of lead up to continue our discussion on the matter. I want to sort of switch to another question now, but it also links to what you've both been saying, Claire and Wayne. So basically, a recent Eurobarometer survey shows that the Maltese are most likely in Europe to think that the landscape in rural areas in their country has been deteriorating since 2010. Long term, the current trends are not being considered as sustainable, basically. What measures can we say that are currently being taken to tackle this?
If I may tackle this question. At the moment, not many, if not none at all. No measures are being taken to address this glaring necessity. In the first place, Malta has not ratified the European Landscape Convention. which would add some measure of protection to the landscape. In the second place, the very liberal and discretionary policies regarding development in ODZ and protecting the landscape are still in place. Also, we have seen a number of decisions by members of the Planning Commission wherein very liberal developments have been allowed in places where there should be a presumption against development. To add to this, I have to say that the government is a chief culprit as a developer. For example, in places which are protected, which are scheduled, like with IRDA, the government agency Infrastructure Malta has asphalted and tarmacked the road, which goes against all principles and policies of proper protection of the landscape. However, it's there. It has not been sanctioned or punished in any way. Also, the government has an exemption when it says that developments are in the national interest. Then it is exempted from complying with the rules. As a result, it's one of the main culprits in spoiling our landscape. I also have to make reference to the rural policy. The draft for this has been published. However, I have to add that is not an improvement on the previous edition. And if we continue in this manner, we will have even less protection to the commercialization of the countryside.
So you do not think that in light of this, so as you said, the Planning Authority has published a new rural policy. It was basically aimed at reducing ODZ development to a minimum, basically. So you do not think that this policy will be effective in reaching its aims?
I have to make a small correction. It has not been published in its definitive state. A draft has been published for consultation. Now, this draft is not an improvement on the previous edition. Rather, it is worse. It provides for commercialization of the countryside. You can set up commercial activity in the countryside. There is no further protection. It leads to increased urban structures in the countryside, in ODZ areas. Also, there is no height limitation for building in the countryside. And basically, there is no protection for country paths and rural things. It allows for nebulous and vague wording, which can be obviously act as loopholes for unscrupulous developers, and it is not satisfactory at all. No, the devil is in the details. I would advise people to read it carefully, compare it to the previous edition, and to what is desired to be done, and to note how it is not an improvement.
And the others, what do you think about this? Do you think that the rural policy, so maybe you want to add on to what Claire has already said, or maybe you want to sort of delve into something else? Do you think that the policy will be effective in reaching its aims?
I don't know if I can maybe, rather than clarify, I think we need to discuss a bit the policy process here, because it's very easy to say policy should be a box in which you can't put anything in and can't get anything out. Everything should be non-discretionary. I think there are big difficulties in planning if you try to make planning non-discretionary. I have difficulties with a title like Saving ODZ, because frankly, it means that if we're at that point of saving, we're really already, clinging to the life raft when the current is pulling it away. But as well, because the general outlook that we take towards the environment, and I would say this across the environmental policy or planning policy, the breadth of environmental and planning policy, is to safeguard and protect. But by safeguarding and protecting, very often it's like, I'm sorry to use, I hate using sports analogies because we tend to use them very badly in Malta, but it's like you're a football team and you're playing Ashraf al-Kasha. 10 people in the box trying to prevent yourself from conceding a goal against the best team in the world. No, you're going to concede goals all the time. That's what happens. We're doing nothing I think we're not doing anything where we take a proactive approach to our environment, and that is what worries me the most, both in the urban and in the rural. situation. And I would say perhaps ODZ is a bit of a misnomer, as KTP, as the Camerat Alperiti pointed out in their feedback to the policy. The issue is not, there are types of development that need to happen in the rural area, for sure. If you repair a boundary wall, it's development at the end of the day, on the basis of the definitions of what development is. The issue is, what kind of landscape, what kind of environment do we want to enjoy, and how do we go about achieving it? Because we can try to protect from everything that we're going to receive, but we're doing nothing that is proactive. And to me, this is the biggest challenge that we face on many levels with environmental issues. To be honest, the one that scares me a bit as well here is that very often I'm not sure that we know what we want, but this is maybe a matter more for the urban area than for the rural.
I think the unfortunate situation is that when trying to decide what type of environment we want, we know what we are aware of the environment which we want. In fact, there are many opinion polls that state that we regular abuse ODZ land. It's one of the main issues that worry us, the people. So the biggest concern is we want really and truly agricultural land to enjoy. But what we want is different to what those who get access to the building sites, to manage to build in ODZ land, they get to build on it. That's not what we want. So there's a big dilemma here. What we want is different to what they want. They want buildings to bring in money, to basically keep on making a profit. And that is why they will keep on building and building and building. Quite frankly, if you had to ask for my opinion, unfortunately, I feel we are going to, this is the whole point of it, of the discussion, saving ODZ. And as you said, we're at a point where we're clinging on to it, because we're at a point where nearly every day we're seeing new headlines. ODZ land, they're going to build on it, and so and so and so. And I think it's the unfortunate situation where we want to enjoy agricultural land, we want to enjoy outside development zones. Yet there are people in the big seats, wearing in the big chairs, who are going against our needs, which is quite a sad thing, because those in government, they should represent the voice of the people. Yet at the end of the day, they're not. They're actually doing the complete opposite.
Just like to build on what Jacques said earlier on. Yes, it does feel like there's a football team with 10 people in the box defending against every possible league. This is how NGOs work vis-a-vis when playing against the bigger teams, which are Sandro and his lot. And every day we are trying to keep goals out. Sometimes we launch a counter-attack of some sort or other, but we have to realize, all of us here, that the rules are rigged against us. The referee is either not there or completely drunk. And we can say we're fighting a losing battle, but the only thing that's left to do is to keep on fighting it.
No, Wayne, that's not what I was referring to, really. If I can clarify, I wasn't referring to the position of NGOs, which I know to be difficult. I was referring really to the whole approach we take to the environment. It's really, we don't take a how do I make an environment better approach. We take what safeguards can I try to put in place. And I think that will never result in betterment, unfortunately. It will just result in things deteriorating at a different pace. At best,
I just stole your analogy for a few seconds.
No, it's fine. I mean, because
it's also telling of why there is limited time and space to be proactive from.
Of course there is, and that is you.
Because we're all the time trying to stop. I don't know, stopping infrastructure in Malta from driving straight.
Yes. And that is a weapon that is used as well by. I mean, it's part of the process of the policy implementation process, which is used very often against NGOs. But what I want to say here as well is, what I mean, let's take the issue of, surely nobody amongst us will disagree that farming should take place in the rural area, no? But even there, we have to be careful with how we do things. I mean, I'll never forget, I was on the appeals board. I can't remember what year it was now, it's been a while. But going to Gozo on a site inspection trip, and seeing everywhere huge constructions being built, because that was the European standard and that was what European funding was being given for. And that still has a huge landscape impact. So again, our issue is that we don't take a design approach to some of these issues. I mean, and this is why, to some degree, I think I'm as an academic in this subject, but also as somebody with a design background, I'm very concerned when I hear about discretionary or non-discretionary, because first of all, there's a lot of planning theory that goes into this. But of course, the risk with non-discretionary is the way that we address a lot of policy. You know, it's sort of, it passes, it passes, it passes, it passes, it passes, okay, then it's okay. Or it passes 10 checklists on the list, but it doesn't pass the 11th, so it doesn't pass. And sometimes that's not necessarily a suitable way of dealing with development. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, you can have all the any loophole is there to be exploited, unfortunately, in these situations. My problem is that I don't think there is any way that you can tie any loopholes tight enough that they won't be used. At the end of the day, there will always be a way for those people who are unscrupulous. So to me, again, the issue comes back to what is the outlook we take to somehow find a way to make things better all around. It's also to a large degree a question of culture. What is our culture of design? What is our culture of the environment? Because let's not kid ourselves. At the end of the day, politicians take decisions on the basis of core common culture. All your theory of the policy process, and maybe Tim will back me up here, or from his research, will tell you that politicians will not take decisions that go against the culture, or at least the core culture. So you were right. There are people who are voicing their opinion against something, but as many as there are people voicing an opinion against something, there are other people who are silently getting along with their thing and keeping their head down and happy to go with the flow. So unfortunately, we rely very often on people like you, to Wayne in this case, to be taking a stand, whereas others are happy to be silent. And of course, that is also part of the process. But there is a cultural issue here about how we look at design and how we deal with the environment.
Aħna nixtiequ li nifhmu iktar ċertu nies illi jgħidu li jħobbu l-ambjent. Jikkundannaw Sandro and Deloitte flok jgħidu Sandro x'qed jgħid ħażin, ma x'jiena nixtieq nitgħallem mis-superb u nies li nirrappreżenta u mis-superbi lanqas. Aħna jekk hemm xi ħaġa li bħala MDA tista' tagħmel biex nimmeljoraw qed tgħid inti rridu xejn illi tkun proattiv aħna nagħmlu. Aħna nixtiequ naraw pereżempju gruppi ta' environmentalists illi jiġu bi proġetti li jkunu environmental friendly għaliex għandna numru ta' consortium u investituri illi mhux interessati jibnu appartamenti, mhumiex interessati jibnu ODZ, assolutament. Imma interessati illi jagħmlu proġett u jinvestu u jagħmlu profitti għaliex le. Però ejja nitkellmu biex naraw x'inhu huma dawn it-tip ta' proġetti illi nistgħu inbiegħu l-idejat tagħhom biex aħna ngħidu pereżempju fejn nafielu. Bħalissa hawn kummerċ fih fuq picnic sites pereżempju, mhux il-developers qegħdin jixtru l-ODZ, hawn numru ta' nies illi peress li ma tantx open spaces dal-pajjiż qed jixtru tmiem ta' raba idawruhom bil-ħitan tas-sejjieħ fil-fatt tal-numru ta' bennejja li għamlu il-ħitan tas-sejjieħ biex jirranġaw il-ħitan tas-sejjieħ u jiżiraw siġar ta' żebbuġ and whatever. Jiena naħseb li dak huwa sabiħ. Għax m'hemmx abbuż daqshekk billi inti tħawwel is-siġar fejn jkunu abbandonati, għandna problema wkoll illi tajjeb wieħed jinnota. Illi sfortunatament hawn ħafna landlords, owners ta' partijiet fl-ODZ illi mhumiex developers irtenni dawn huma werrieta jew kellha l-art ilha tintiret minn ġenerazzjoni għall-oħra. Illi għandna liġi f'dal-pajjiż illi biex joħduha lura din l-art mingħand il-bidwi li qed itihom tiġiġa fis-sena jew qed itihom 20 euros fis-sena, irridu jġibu permess biex jaħduha lura, din hija liġi li teżisti hemmhekk. Allura hemm stress qawwi u pressjoni kbira, mhux ma tiddeveloper għax nerġa' nagħmel statement ieħor. Aħna m'aħniex interessati li nibnu l-ODZ. Jiġifieri when someone points fingers at somebody within the NDA, that's not true. Aħna qegħdin ngħidu we are not interested to develop in ODZ, especially virgin land. Anzi, aħna ħriġna b'idejat f'din il-policy li qiegħda draft Fej għadna anka l-agricultural stores, anka l-farms, għandu jkun specifikament fejn jistaw jimbnew l-farms. Mux kull fejn l-ODZ nibnu farm, għax farm, jew kella kull min jibni agricultural store jista' jmur fejn s-salib tal-olja u jibni agricultural store. Għandu jkun hemm speċifikament areas fejn tajt tisma' hawnhekk tista' tagħmel seħ, però f'din il-lokalità tal-kampanja fejn jigawdu n-nies, is-sereq kellu m'għandhomx ikunu jiġu żviluppati hawnhekk, mhux kull kif tista' tibni anke għall-istess farmer, aħna qegħdin noħorġu b'idejat proactive. Aħna nixtiequ li jiġu nies jew NGOs fejn għandhom idejat tajbin biex nippromovu lill-investituri li flok imorru jibqgħu jibnu l-appartamenti ġej sewwa, kull imkien appartamenti, ikollna proġetti ta' tip differenti. Ikollna proġetti li jkunu doable, li xorta jaqalaw il-flus u li n-nies, is-soċjetà, il-well-being jitjieb, ikollhom fejn joħorġu. Per eżempju, ħassem il-proġett, tu bil-fer, huwa proġett sabiħ. L-akwarju muġibba l-awla huwa proġett sabiħ, huwa proġett li il-familja Maltija, il-familji Maltin jieħdu gost huwa tourist attraction ukoll u bis-sens, anke bħala viżwal, ma rajniex kaxxi, rajna xi ħaġa bis-sens. U mibni fuq art ODZ. Jiġifieri jista' jkun hemm lok ta' proġetti illi għamlu sens u l-soċjetà tuħu pjaċir bihom.
With all due respect, you mentioned open spaces.
Maybe wait, because Claire has been waiting.
Sorry, go ahead, Claire.
Okay. I would like to address Sandro's declaration that developers do not want to build or in ODZ.
Let her conclude her point.
The developers who MDA, because we are not developers, we are an association.
Yes. There are a plethora of examples where developers, maybe members of the MDA, maybe not, have developed buildings or other structures in ODZ. Let us not forget that ODZ also refers to the sea and to the foreshore. There is a blatant example of a building right over the foreshore and over the sea carried out by a developer. So let's start off with that. There are other cases where developers, maybe members of the MDA, maybe not, have sought and obtained applications for permissions to develop small agricultural stores to convert them into villas. So that is the case. I would also like to address Jacques' point about the impossibility of having a planning system which is not discretionary based. This is obviously true. I mean, there has to be some level of discretion granted to the people who are deciding upon planning applications. However, this brings up another important point about how this discretion is utilized. And this boils down to the people sitting on these boards. I'm afraid to say that in our experience, the experience of NGOs, and also many residents and objectors, this is not always a very pleasant or a very fair experience, because the people, most of the people sitting on the boards, do not have the concept of fair hearing, where equal opportunity is given to both sides, and I'm afraid to say that the environmental aspect is totally ignored in these cases. The members of the board simply look at the planning law. Wherever there's any reference to environmental aspects, they ignore it and stick to their own warped interpretation of the planning policy. So that results in the proliferation of buildings and structures in ODZ, both in the rural areas and also on the sea, on the foreshore, hand over the seat.
Okay. I would like to build on what Sandro said. Sandro spoke about open spaces and investments in eco-friendly open spaces. First of all, I hope you're not asking for eco-friendly developments on ODZ land, because I mean there's no more space to build on. Let's face it, there's nothing. Second, I will also tell you why people who love the environment do not exactly jump at the opportunity to come to the MDA to present their proposals, for one simple reason: because people who love the environment have spent the last month and a half trying to fight the takeover of two huge open spaces in Ahrax and Mizib. And again, not a word from your lobby, not a word from many other lobbies, but we all expect NGOs to come up with environmentally friendly proposals for development. You take care of the environmentally friendly development and the proposals, because you have certain clout with the PA, which we are not allowed. Okay, we're not playing. You know that your lobby is much stronger than we are when it comes to pushing from simple hearings to the consultation of policy papers. And yet again, I ask you, not a single side. And there is also, please allow me to finish, Sandro. Allow me to finish. I allow you to speak. I allow you to speak freely. Also, another thing. There is one other huge problem. Sandro, kjoġbok, tajtek ċansin. Tajtek ċans. Grazie. Another issue right now that is not being tackled, and it's a huge problem in ODZ areas, is the issue of land registry. Government has no idea what its own lands are. So there are developers, speculators, small-time developers, family owners, families, who can buy parcels of land from government. First of all, there's no public access to such information, which is really not transparent. And it allows for stuff like Ahrax and Mizib to happen, but also other more silent land grabs. I, for example, start to feel a bit worried when an infrastructure minister announces a road, the doing up of a road leading to a bay that doesn't exist anymore, the bay in Mirriħ. What for? Is there something going on there as well? Because this is what people who love the environment do. They have to literally follow everything from the time we open the newspapers in the morning till the last minute of our free time, trying to see that someone isn't trying to rape somewhere, some plot of virgin land somewhere, build either a supermarket, agricultural store, a farm, a villa. For example, in your submissions about the rural policy, did you specifically say no more villas on ODZ, no more pools on ODZ?
100%.
People who love the environment do.
Nerġa' nagħmel statement ieħor. Fuq ODZ land ma nixtiequx naraw l-ebda tip ta' bini. Ħlief ovvjament illi għal dak il-farmer illi għandu bżonn ċertu affarijiet biex ikun jista' jaħdem l-għelliet tiegħu. U f'ċertu areas, mhux kullimkien, għax hemm artijiet illi jistgħu jinħadmu għal biex jipproduċi l-agrikoltura. Għandek proprjetà li hija tajba l-kampanja, għandek artijiet illi għandha tiġi enjoyed by the public. Aħna li nixtiequ biss naraw li l-NGOs, ċertu NGOs, mhux kollha għax hemm ħafna minnhom illi jifhmuha sew u li naħdmu tajjeb magħhom, illi jekk inti għandek struttura diġà, jekk inti għandek villa diġà fil-ODZ, però din hija mibnija bil-permess, u għandha permess jew għax mibnija qabel il-1967, jew għal xi raġuni għandha l-permess, issa aħna ma nistgħux niddeċidu min għandu permess għal fejġabu. Dak it-tip ta' proprjetà tista' tiġi irranġata jew żviluppata aħjar milli u l-iktar forma l-ambjent. Ma naqblux ma' commercialization, aħna naqblu ma' illi inti ikollok agricultural store, per eżempju, u fil-kampanja tal-commercialization structures biex iżid it-traffiku u żid l-impatt fuq il-kampanja tagħna. Però bħala statement l-MDA, però mhux id-developers, għax aħna m'għandniex kontroll fuq id-developers huma l-awtoritajiet illi jiddeċiedu li dak id-developer jew ieħor kienu bil-permess jew le, però bħala prinċipju fondamentali l-MDA biqbilu unanimu mill-membri tagħna kollha ma nqbilux illi tkompli titnaqqar iktar art verġni fil-kampanja għall-bini. Jiġifieri għaliex pointing fingers at someone who agrees. Jiena ma nistax ma naqbilx ma xi qed jaqbel miegħi. Jiġifieri din il-perception illi l-MDA għandha xi influenza fuq il-politiku, anzi, aħna xi kollu niġġieldu mal-politiku, il-problema li l-mod kif nagħmlu l-gwerra aħna ma nagħmlux sempliċement li jkollu press releases, aħna nagħmlu niġġieldu face to face u nipprovaw nikkonvinċu illi ċertu proġetti mhumiex tajbin la għas-saħħa tal-poplu, la biex l-impact u għall-ebda raġuni oħra, aħna meta naraw kemm huma pereżempju għandna developer partikolari li laqas membru tagħna. Irid jagħmel il-velel u jrid jieħu r-razzetta tal-pigs u jrid jieħu il-fortizza u jrid jieħu kemm huma kollha biex hu jagħmel il-profitti tiegħu għaskapitu tal-poplu Malti, għaskapitu tal-membri tagħna li jixtru għal-flus. Aħna ma naqblux magħhom dawn huma pastażati, dawn huma affarijiet li huma unacceptable. U qegħdin nitkellmu. U meta jkun il-moment, inkun qegħdin nitkellmu aktar fl-aħjar fuq ċerti proġetti kontroversjali u li naqblu ma' ħafna mill-NGOs. Għalhekk ma nixtieq iktar ikun hemm komunikazzjoni bejna u bejn l-NGOs għax ħafna drabi ikunu naqblu imma l-perċezzjoni hija li aħna qegħdin il-bot. Ma mhux veru, mhux minnu dan.
If I may interject here and ask you, because we're also being asked this question by the public. So if you've mentioned before that you agree that this change must be made in these habits and in these trends which we are seeing here. So if not MDA, who should we expect to make the first step for this change to start happening, to initiate this change?
All together we win. Divided, aħna dejjem anke ma' Wayne u mal-graffiti u ma' online dejjem stidinniehom biex niltaqgħu nitkellmu ma' daqs ma naqblux. Jistgħu joħorġu minn hawnhekk jgħidu naħdu ma naqblu xejn magħhom u ma nafdawhomx lilhom għandhom dritt. Imma l-inqas ismani. Issa tgħidliem li mhix bżonnok, jista' jgħidliem m'għandix bżonn l-MDA biex nagħmel il-punti tiegħi, però naqbel miegħek. It-trend hija li mis-70 jinklaw, mis-60 jinklaw biex jintelqu l-Ingliżi raw, l-ambjent mar il-baħar. U qiegħed ibagħti kulħadd anke mill-investi meta tara il-Maglina u l-vilej ta' ħajriġu tal-Maglina ta' Baħriġġa se jkunu affettwati u kienu affettwati dejjem bil-matab u bil-problemi tal-matab u bil-inċeneratur issa ukoll fl-ODZ. Aħna kellna biċċar bħalli quddiem il-baħar sabi ħatant il-lejja miżbla. Dak inħobbu l-ambjent aħna tal-pajjiż. Waħda mill-nisbaħ sajt tagħna tagħmilha miżbla dak planning aħna tal-pajjiż tagħmel miżbla quddiem il-baħar. Ma tagħmilx sens. M'hemmx vision, m'hemmx foresight, aħna nittakiljaw. Piece by piece planning li dak huwa ħażin. Anke aħna bħal-MDA kontra ċertu partial reviews illi qed jaċavolaw ċertu proġetti li huma tal-Britannia wkoll. U jkollna argumenti internament mal-Britannia. Għax ma nagħmlux il-partial reviews taċavola proġett partikolari għaskapitu tal-ambjent u tan-nies li investew fil-madwar.
If I may answer the question and also part of what Mr. Ketkuti said, first of all, I'm pleased to hear that Mr. Ketkuti has just said that his organization doesn't just issue press releases, but goes to argue face-to-face with the people in power, which also confirms what I said earlier on, that the MDA has much more access than we have to...
Mux kulħadd jiltaqa' mal-politiku.
Nista' nmestijek jogħġbu li aħna ma niltaqgħux mal-politiċi, aħna issa noddu nagħmlu count kemm il-darba tħallna Kastilja aħna, kemm il-darba tħall Kastiljanti, kemm il-darba tħallna d-Dar Ċentrali aħna, kemm il-darba tħall il-Dar Ċentrali inti. Għax statistika mhijiex opinjoni, le mhix l-istess aċċess Sandro. Tajjeb, u ħankompli nwieġbek. Nwieġeb lil min staqsam il-pubbliku l-ewwel dwar min għandu jieħu l-ewwel pass. L-ewwel pass infakkar li hemm nies fil-Ministeri li huma ħansulin imħallsin biex ikunu konsulenti biex jidbu l-policies, biex jidraftjaw il-policies. Issa, jew dawn in-nies huma kapaċi, jew dawn in-nies qed jitħallsu għal xejn għaliex il-policies li ħarġu huma difettivi. Kulħadd ilu jgħid huma difettivi daw sal-Ministru jembors li baqa' jkaxkar saqajħu l-policies difettivi ma bidilhom qatt. Ilna 5 snin ngħidu l-policies difettivi huma nbidel xejn. Mela jew dawn in-nies inkapaċi, jew allura għandhom interess ma jbidlux l-affarijiet. U meta nisma' Lisandro jgħid li jiltaqa' face to face ma' dan in-nies spiss isu ma ġara xejn. U aħna biex nidlubbaw nagħmlu hekk, għal fisser jew il-laqgħat qed isiru għal xejn, jew qed isiru għal interess kontrarju ta' dak li jgħid Ketkuti. Hekk. Grazzi.
Dak hija ġlida personali lejn Sandro Andilot kif qal tajjebu, però jiena xorta tiħli dej taħdiberija li wejn nissu wejn plas. U meta jrid aħna disposti biex nikkomunikaw magħhom.
Però toħx tilaba tal-fit, mamma. Ma nabux tal-fit, mamma. Ġlida personali. Taf li ġejjin minn lobbies differenti li qatt ma se jaqblu l-lobbies fl-interessi tagħhom, toħx tgħidha personali, issa jekk toħodha personali, ma nafx. With a thick skin, nispera.
If we can let
għandek il-kamra tal-Bejt il-ħin kollu jiltaqgħu mal-Gvern. Għandek entitajiet oħra illi qed kontribut jiltaqgħu mal-Gvern, aħna niltaqgħu mal-oppożizzjoni wkoll mhux mal-Gvern biss u nippruvaw nesprimu dak li naħsbu li hu tajjeb. Imma ma huwa qed jiddeċiedi.
Jien nista' ngħidlek li l-organizzazzjoni rappreżentajjin qatt ma daħlet Kastilja bil-mod kif tħalt inti.
Let's give some time to Claire now so she can make her point, please.
Okay. Hi, Yasmin, thank you very much. You asked, what can we done or what can be done to change the situation and who should be doing it? Well, I would agree with limitedly with Sandro about this, that it should be done by everyone. By everyone, what do I mean? By the general population who should show their constant disapproval or disapproval of bad policies and bad decisions by the politicians, and approval in the cases where good things are done. And also, however, I put a lot of the onus of responsibility for this on politicians. I am sorry that it is not enough to say that we need to find a balance. I absolutely hate this phrase, that we have to find a balance between the environment and sustainable development. I am afraid that the seesaw, if you can call it that, has gone down so hard on one side of development, and it's not sustainable development. It is like you have a huge big sumo wrestler on one side of the seesaw weighing it down. Now we have to try and make up, all right? Because our rural environment, our unbuilt environment, our natural environment is practically at breaking point. We have seen a recent study where biodiversity in Malta has absolutely crashed. And why do you think it has crashed? It has crashed because of increasing urbanization and because of all these roads to nowhere being done by the government. Now, so there's the responsibility upon us as citizens to make our opinion known and to express our disapproval, and not only to be activists online. You know, you have to be a real activist and hold power to account. The second place, there is an onus of responsibility upon the politicians to actually listen actively to what we say. Because I'm afraid that there is a great amount of greenwash going on at the moment about these silly tree planting sessions or whatever, and fake green initiatives, superficial green initiatives, which pass off as being environmentally friendly. No, the politicians have a responsibility to actually put into place good environmental policies and not simply greenwash measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. So with your comment, you have now sort of touched upon actually my next question. So I was going to ask, with a growing population and an economy that must sustain this growth, obviously, how can we find this so-called balance that you dislike between development that can maintain this change while also preserving the environment? Maybe Jack even can also share his opinion, or Tim can share their opinion on this matter.
If I may, I think in the first place, we again, coming back to the discussion we had before, we tend to take very much this stance of it's a bit what Claire is saying about this balance. No, it's the environment versus development. I think the question we need to be asking ourselves is, what is the right kind of development to get the environment that we want? Because otherwise, frankly, we'll never get the environment that we want. We're always going to be having 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. And the balance of those, if you can call it a balance, will always be negative. The issue is, what is the right kind of, what do we aspire, what is the kind of country that we aspire to live in? Because growth in itself has no value if it doesn't give us well-being. I can be the richest man in the world, because somebody says no, trying to breathe money or trying to eat money. It doesn't improve my well-being. Of course, I mean, there's no doubt that money buys many things, but it's not the point. The issue is, as a country, what is the kind of environment that we aspire to, and then how do we develop in a direction that gives us economic well-being, environmental well-being, and social well-being? I don't think we're asking that question, to be honest. We continue to speak of balancing this and balancing that without looking long-term and looking at the bigger picture. And this is, to me, is where, unfortunately, I think we are not succeeding. It's really, we don't really have a view of the bigger picture. And when we do have a view of the bigger picture, we don't take the small steps that are necessary to get there. Usually, it's very nice for me to have a policy that sits on the shelf. But the question is, how do I have a policy that I put into place? How do I make sure that I have the capacity to put that policy into place? It's really, and for example, a transport strategy. Transport strategy is about half now on paper. Except that, of course, we've taken decisions that go directly contrary to that transport policy by widening all the roads. And at the same time, we're not saying what steps we will take to make that transport strategy happen. We don't even have the human resources capacity to make it happen. Similarly, if you look at SPED and what it says about the urban environment, bellezza, the urban environment will be green, rich, pollution-free, etc., etc. What actions are we taking to make it happen? And I think it's the same with the rural. It's really, the question is that, what is the kind of environment that we aspire to? How do we get there? Because otherwise we remain where we are, constantly trying to play 10 men in the box.
If I may continue, one, by answering your question, two, to make reference to what Jack had said earlier on, saying that when it comes to giving permission, especially in politics as well, the government will never go against the core culture. And I wish I could correct him, because it's not really the core culture. They will never go against their core voters. And right now, the main problem is that, so one of the main problems Malta is facing is traffic. We can all agree on that. And now, to deal with a growing population, the government, to put in the national interest, will continue taking over ODZ land to build on roads, in attempt to reduce traffic. Now, once again, and I make reference once again to Jack, we have to see, the government have to see what type of environment they want Malta to be. If we are seeing a constant growth in population in the economy, we have to see how to address it. There are two ways. Either we continue bulldozing all this land to make room for roads and to make room for more cars, damaging more the environment, or to look at the urban land we have now and see how we can improve it, make use for alternative modes of transport, reduce cars as much as possible, reduce traffic and all that. The unfortunate situation is that we, the people, attempt and try to show the government what type of environment we want, what type of environment we want to live in. Yet they continue to build and they continue to bulldoze over the ODZ land to make room for more cars and for us to continue being a densely populated island, to continue and to enhance overpopulation. So we wish to enjoy our agricultural land. We wish to deal with the issue of being a densely populated island. However, the situation at hand is, how are we going to approach it? Are we going to approach it by doing it in a sustainably developed manner? Are we going to do it in an environmental friendly manner? So are we going to make room for bicycle lanes? Are we going to finally improve our public transport system? So are we going to adopt measures to finally reduce traffic, or are we going to do it the easy way and take over our agricultural land, make more room for roads to the point where there won't be any more agricultural land to enjoy?
All right, thank you. I don't know whether anyone else wants to add anything about this. If not, I can maybe Claire.
Yes, I just want to make a point. I was very pleased when you invited me to this webinar because for once, or let's say not for once, but one of the very few times that I have been approached as an environmentalist to talk about these matters, and you have asked very pertinent questions. And unfortunately, I don't see a lot of this kind of interest at such a detailed level in the younger generation. And I would urge you all to, sort of look into the details, stick to the news, really scrutinize what's going on, because unfortunately, if you don't do this, no one else will. I mean, today I'm just coming from a parliamentary debate, committee debate of a parliamentary commission about a law. And I realize that laws are being passed like sausages, basically. You don't want to know what's in them, and they are just protruded, at a very fast rate. But they will affect our lives very greatly. So keep your eyes out, also for what's going on, the policies that are being enacted. So like that, you'll be in charge of things, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to my next question, basically, it's something which you have touched upon briefly now, Claire, but it's something that Jacques has mentioned before. He said that we need to start being proactive. So in terms of being proactive, we know that there have been a number of protests and petitions by independent groups over the past few years regarding ODZ land. Do you think, so this question is directed at anyone really, maybe Tim and Dwayne would be able to also answer in terms of being two individuals who even spearhead these petitions and these protests. Do you think that these initiatives are an effective way to instigate change?
Go first, Tim.
Well, they are certainly one way, and for the people, quite frankly, they're the most popular way, and one of the few ways that they can get their voices heard. Before, when Sandra and Wayne were debating, Wayne mentioned the point saying, we count the many times NGOs have entered Castilia, have entered Parliament to discuss these issues hands-on with MPs. I believe they should take us whenever there's an issue. Unfortunately, sometimes I feel they just stop there. And this wouldn't be the problem of the NGO who would be organizing the protest. It would be the problem of, I feel the government sometimes are a bit ignorant. They choose, whenever there is a problem, there's an issue attacking them, they choose to ignore it. Several times we have seen protests happen and Isa ma ġrat xejn was a comment. It's like nothing ever happened. And obviously, it's extremely demotivating, because you get to a point where you ask yourself, how many times am I going to protest if nothing's going to happen? At the same time, you say, what else can I do? So to answer your question, yes, I mean, I feel they should be done without a question. I feel the government should take on responsibility and, quite frankly, grow up and actually address the fact when there is an issue and not remain silent. I think that's the case. They should continue, but from the other side, there should be respect, and they should address the fact that there is an issue and there is a problem to be addressed. Because it's honestly, sometimes it feels as if you're speaking to a wall. But irrespective of that situation, you have to keep banging on the wall until it's broken down, until they actually hear you. Finally, one way or another.
Okay, to add on to what Tim said, first of all, there isn't a template, there isn't a model, or there isn't a set standard modus operandi of when, where, why to organize and hold protests. Protests do not happen in a vacuum. Protests are an expression of anger. They're a righteous expression of anger when they are sincere protests, and they are genuine protests, and when their interest is not partisan, but is an honest interest. Last year, we had the a protest on the 7th of September in front of Houses of Parliament. It was a protest specifically aimed at the excesses not only of the construction industry, but also the lack of enforcement from the authorities, the lack of vision, issues with transportation, issues with high-rise building, and the way policies are written and representatives on the PA boards are chosen. That was, in a nutshell, why we had to protest, and also had to protest because in that summer of 2019, there were 3 apartment block collapses, which is, in my opinion, something which government hasn't really looked at. Government has ignored this as well. It's something very serious because people lost their lives. Apart from Miriam Pach, this year was buried under a rebel of her own home. There was also another woman who lost her life last year away from her house after her house in Melliha collapsed. And government has done nothing at all. But even without government's intervention, we, for example, together with other NGOs, and Claire was also part of this document, we published a reform with 134 points, reforming planning and construction in Malta, set across 6 specific chapters. Obviously, there's been no response from government. Obviously, if we were some other, maybe a different lobby, maybe if we were anti-NGOs, maybe if we were, I don't know, car importers or developers, not the MDA, maybe we would have had more access to politicians and they would have listened to us maybe a bit more. But the thing is, the way I see it is that protests are not the end. They are a bridge onto something else. And what we'll do now, if we need to protest again, we'll protest again. But what we'll do now is that we'll work on promoting these reforms, which nobody has criticized as yet. Nobody has said, oh, this is wrong, this is not on. Government has just decided to ignore them, but we will lobby further for these proposals to be understood. Finally, on motivation, yes, it can be a very motivating task, finding closed doors in front of you every morning. Opening the Times or Malta Today would already be demotivating in that regard, because all you read is bad news and not just environmentally related news, of course. But giving up is not really an option. I mean, the more we give up, the more land we lose, the more resources we lose, and the more public resources are privatized or given to individuals or lobbies such as the FKNK. Especially, I'm assuming there's an audience that's way younger than I am watching this. Students, we need your help to do this. This is also your future.
Thank you. I think that these are very valid points. Moving on to something else now, maybe I can address this question to Sandra. We've received a question in the comments, and I will be reading the question and together with the comment that was made by one of our viewers. So the question basically reads this: in villages and towns, we have big old beautiful houses which are no longer inhabited. Why aren't developers encouraged to transform these buildings rather than simply tearing them down and building last-minute flats? The comment goes on to say these beautiful structures should be preserved, maintaining the characteristic facades, and perhaps turned into boutique hotels, luxury villas for investors. It could be linked to getting quality tourists, possibly staying long stays in Malta or retiring here rather than quantity tourists. So what is your opinion on this, and how do you respond to this?
proġetti kollha tiżviluppaw Valletta, pereżempju, qed ikollna qegħdin naraw bil-mifju xemmi għal diversi snin u llum qed jiġu arranġati għal boutique hotels first class, għandna l-Embassy pereżempju stess, ħajkollna l-Embassy project se jkun state of the art ġol-Belt Valletta u se jkun hemm hotel li se jkollha 180 sodda. U fost boutique hotels oħrajn għandna pereżempju Three Cities. Il-Birku, il-ġmien tiegħu sar, irridu ninsistu, però aħna mhux dejjem tat-titanu, però irridu ninsistu biex f'ċertu villaġġi, anke outside village course, għandna naħdmu fuq dak ix-xenarju. Jiena jiddispjaċini ngħid il-blaqqa ta' Pinna fil-2006 ġew approvati pjanijiet lokali illi tista' tgħid irvinaw l-streetscapes kollha ta' Malta u Għawdex. U llum qegħdin naraw ir-riżultat ta' dak il-pjanar u deċiżjoni kieżiena illi kellna dakinhar. Illum meta mmur ix-xlendi jien jaqbad nil-biki, niftakar ix-xlendi kif kien. Illum isek jarġa' ħabs u flok qed tara l-baħar u l-ġimien tan-natura qed tara dira ilma. Marsa l-forn l-istess. Nixtieq nara lil Għawdex jiena illi ikun hemm extra effort, ikun hemm viżjoni biex ikun hemm a carrot-and-stick approach illi l-gvern irid jagħti the right incentives biex in-nies aħajjarhom jixtru u jinvestu fi proprjetajiet illi mhux neċessarjament jinbnew kull imkien flettijiet. Però again, hija l-awtorità illi tippjana illi jekk inti għandek developer u minnu jew applikant jew inkella missier ta' 3 tfal illi għandu d-dar tiegħu u jrid iwaqqa dik id-dar għax ġid kbira u jixtieq tella flet kull wieħed it-tfal. Jekk l-awtorità tiddeċidi li tista' tagħti dak il-permess, l-għandieri min hi biex iżommu. Jiġifieri aħna naħseb illi rridu nkunu kif qal Jake Borch, jekk ma jimpurtax ngħid l-isem Jack, sorry. Illi du nkunu proactive. Bħalissa pereżempju l-Ministru Arun Farrugia nafu li jixtieq ħafna jaħdem fuq din it-tema u qegħdin nagħmlu anke proposti biex forsi jiġu l-għajn u nixtieq li anke l-ambjentalisti u nies oħrajn li jħobbu l-patrimonju tagħna naħdmu flimkien biex inħadnu ċertu identitajiet ta' ċertu villaġġi u ħula li llum qegħdin jinqerdu jew jistgħu jinqerdu jiġu kull appartamenti jiena bħala chairman tal-Malta Developers Association, nemmen illi m'hawnx bżonn illi nippjanaw kull imkien flettijiet, nemmen illi għandna jkollna mix. Hemm postijiet illi il-flettijiet illum ormai nistgħu nkomplu nibnu flettijiet f'ċertu żoni u hemm postijiet oħra illi ta' min jinċentiva iktar l-investituri u l-end user, anke l-end user, biex jixtri proprjetajiet li huma ta' dan it-tip li qed issemmi inti fil-naqblu 100%. U nixtiequ qabel ma jkun too late għax qegħdin nibżgħu li diġà qegħdin tard. Aħna meta mmorru nitqabbel l-indistriġġiewi is-surrieq u naraw ċertu toroq għad-Dingli pereżempju, tara ċertu toroq tajt anke dit-triq irfinaw issa. Imma ma ninsewx dak huma pjanijiet illi saru liġi 20 ta' snin ilu u llum qegħdin naraw il-frott li telat f'dik is-siġra. Qegħdin naraw riżultat ta' nuqqas ta' pjanar viżjoni.
Nistaqsik mistoqsija, Sandra, jekk ma jimpurtax. Mistoqsija, Claire, please.
I think I'll just go very fast. If I may, I think the commentator was referring to houses and big houses in the urban core of our towns and villages. Now, there are and have always been policies which seek to protect and preserve these properties in the urban conservation area. And these policies have been enacted even relatively recently with the strategic plan for the environment. So I do not agree with Sandro that there are no policies which safeguard these properties. But what happens? There is the very weird, liberal, extensive, and basically thwarted interpretation of these policies. For example, there is a specific policy which was enacted in 2015, which says that the streetscape must be preserved. And it seeks to protect the height and the characteristics of certain streetscapes. Now, this is ignored in its entirety. And there is a result. Developers, maybe members of the MDA, maybe not, find it more profitable simply to demolish these houses and rebuild with increased height. So that's why these properties have not been protected and conserved. Thank you.
You know, Għal-nistaqsik mistoqsija, Sandra, kjoġbok, inti bil-raġun li għadek kif dwar il-liġijiet ta' 2006 jagħmel ħafna sens dak li qed daqqa ta' pinna tajjarna il-planning minn Malta u għataw minn qed jibbenifika issa minn dawn il-liġijiet ta' 2006 illi irvinaw il-karattru ta' ħafna rħula. Inti wieħed minn 4 żviluppaturi li għandkom art kbira s-swatar u għandek applikazzjoni biex tbiddel iż-zoning fis-swatar minn l-unika green land li għalfa tal-swatar li kif nafu u wara ħal-maġem main road enormi biex instar, hemm Greenland waħda u dik hija maqsuma bejnek u bej l-żviluppaturi oħra. Inti wara dal-klim kollu li għadek kifet fuq il-proprjetà, il-kostruzzjoni ideali, il-kostruzzjoni ma tirvinax l-irħula, il-kostruzzjoni l-żon kwalità tal-ħajja, eċetera. Inti l-pjanijiet tiegħek għas-swatar x'inhuma? Se tibnihom appartamenti jew le? Jew se tħalli spazju miftuħ?
Jiena mhux ħadd nistaqsik x'għandek inti personali, la vollja nagħmel. Pero ħalli ħalli.
M'għandi xejn.
Ħalli ħalli. Jekk qed issemmi li għandi fraction ta' biċ-ċart illi hija fraction żgħira ta' biċ-ċart li nassigurat jiġifieri mhux għandi 3% jew 2% ma anyway. Imma vera għandi fraction fuq biċ-ċart illi mixtrija wara li ġiet id-deċiżjoni tal-2006. Jiġifieri wara dik l-art li qed issemmi li tkun personali ġiet approvata rationalization ta' 2006. Meta kienet earmark li tista' tinbena, jien ipproponejt, jiena Sandra Ketkut ipproponejt u qiegħda li il-Planning Authority illi minn flok 15% open spaces, jien Sandra Ketkut li għandi fraction żgħira, għad ħafna nies u għatlu mhux ma nagħmlux 30% open spaces, ħalli jkun proġett differenti bil-komplement tal-areas li tradizzjonalment.
Għaltom parapetti privati l-open spaces, mhumiex open spaces, huma parapetti privati.
Torna ġenarja, hija deċiżjoni ta' Sandra Petkuti u tal-ebda developer hija deċiżjoni tal-awtoritajiet illi magħmula minn nies li huma esperti u periti u planners illi jiddeċidu u għandhom il-poter li jiddeċidu. U jiddeċidu fl-interess tal-lokal, mhux fl-interess ta' Sandra Petkuti. Jienek Sandra Petkuti għandu dar li tiwaqqafhom minnaħa mis-solari. Hija l-Planning Authority illi tiddeċidi jekk għandix nagħmel hekk jew le.
Darba 1000. Imma tiġix tgħid lill-planners qed jiddeċidu favur il-lokalità meta r-residenti u NGOs wieġbu consultation u ma hemmx kummenti pożittivi dwarha.
Jien dak li ngħid nemmen fih, and that's to be counted.
Mela tibniex is-swatar.
Ma mhux problema ħallasni tagħha ma nibniex. Anzi mhux tal-li aħna qegħdin nissuġġerixxu lill-gvern illi fejn hemm martit li daħlu fl-iskema tal-bini ħalli nagħmluha ċara mhux fuq ODZ fuq artijiet li huma bil-burners u bixtrija bl-eluf ta' euros u bil-miljuni tal-euros. M'għandux jibagħti l-investitur jekk inti tagħmel open space għandu jibagħti l-istat li jrid jixtriha. Jiena ma nistax nifhem kif inti tiġi hawnhekk u tippretendi xi investitur jaqbad il-flus tiegħu u jagħmilhom open space jekk il huwa mhux jikser il-liġi għax jekk qed tikser il-liġi allura tibda
Pretendi li l-gvern jaqaf bih l-assi tiegħu li huma anke l-art ta' Malta li u jaqaf bihom lil-nispalek biex jibqgħu jiġu żviluppati. Dak nippretendi.
Jiena qatt ma xtajt biċċar, imma qed tara d-diskussjoni hija purament personali ħalli ġie l-puntajiet li qalet fih.
Mhux fissazzjoni bil-personali. Issa neħu ritratt tiegħek u nbusu biex torqodsaw, ejja. Kelmu bħalli rġiel.
Inti xed tinstema' Jasmin.
Sorry, I need to just spot this comment. Isn't it a problem? I will sort of give you the floor to continue your point. But isn't it a problem if we're saying that this is the blame is on the planning authority, but then we as citizens are participating and continuing to add on this? Isn't it we're saying that we want change? Why don't we start by doing the change ourselves rather than just putting the blame on the planning authority?
Malta jixtri biċ-ċart jew proprjetà li għandu dritt legalment għalija u jagħmilha ta' patriot u jtirna għal open space. Jien ma nistax nifhem għal Malta mimlija pollution u traffiku s'issa ma naf il-ħadd li għandu l-liċenzja tal-karozza u għandu l-karozza u jekk ħalibda fil-ewwel eżempju, ħalli ma nużajx iktar il-karozza. Kulħadd għandu dritt juża l-karozza, allura inti trid tagħmel policies illi għamlu sens. Jekk is-suwatar u postijiet oħrajn fit-2006 li aħna kontra tagħhom għandna, il-gvern joġbu jdaħħal iktar fl-iskema tal-bil. Mhix tara wara bil-prezzijiet tas-suq x'tort għandu. Huwa d-deċiżjonijiet tal-planning illi kienu biex fid-direzzjoni tajba jekk kellha tkun agricultural land. Niġi għal-punt tal-village course li għal il-Dr. Bonnello. Il-village course ma naqblu il-village course ma jisirux appartamenti, għalla ma mhux ngħidu għal-village course, aħna qed ngħidu outside il-village course, anzi. Aħna mhux il-village course, għalla ħares naraw il-village course bl-appartamenti issa, imma qegħdin ngħidu li l-urban areas li lil mill-village course fejn huwa diġà permessibbli jinbnew 5 sulari għandu jkun hemm method biex f'ċertu areas issir mitigation biex insalvaw l-identità tal-irħula illi il-poplu manti għandu għal-qalbu. Ġifieri dak u ma tistax tagħmel skapitu tas-sejjer għax hekk is-sit għandu dan. U dan jixtieq jibni flek kull wieħed attwal, ma tistax issabdaq tagħtilna tajlu isma' inti ma tħroġ mejda mela tibniex, allura tissib soluzzjoni ġusta fejn il-gvern u l-awtoritajiet isibu soluzzjonijiet biex min għandu dik il-proprjetà igawdi inċentivi ġodda u fl-istess ħin nibżaw għal pjanar aħjar, nibżaw għal dik il-lokalità partikolari.
Thank you. Let's take Claire's comment now, and then we'll start closing off the discussion because it's already 6:30, so then I'll ask for some closing remarks. But first, let's take Claire's comment.
Yes, you have touched upon a very important point. You asked, how can we just put the blame on the planning authority exclusively when we, I'm referring to developers, continue requesting change of zoning, building up in the village cores extensively, even building in ODZ. And I think there's a very true point about it there. We cannot continue with this charade, where we pretend to be concerned about ODZ, where we pretend to be concerned about the village cores and urban conservation areas. But then, in reality, we continue building in an abusive, let's say, in an abusive way. We can't simply say the planning authority or the government changed the laws. That change in policy would have come about because of extensive lobbying, inordinately effective lobbying by some groups to procure a certain change of policy. So let's not put all the blame on the regulator. The regulator does not operate in a vacuum. And this is where I tend to link it to what Jacques said before regarding the prevailing culture in the country.
Thank you for your comment. Before we close off, I'd like to sort of ask you if you have any closing remarks, whether you have any comments would you like to make in terms maybe of what measures can be taken to ensure that the ODZ land is safeguarded going forward, and we'll close off with this.
Okay, can I start off?
Yes.
There are two basic takeaways from this session that I would like to pass on. Number one, as stated before by Wayne and also by Tim, about the power of persistence, not just relying on a one-off protest here and there or whatever, but to keep plugging at it, and eventually results will be seen. I mean, in all great issues, results were not seen in a day. We can have the example of women's emancipation and the civil rights movement. The results were not obtained in a day. It's over a long span of time. And the second point, which I would really advocate for, is for the constitutional entrenchment of a right of action to protect the environment. As NGOs, we are militating in favor of this action. And I mean, we would be testing Sandro's goodwill if he would also back this proposal. Thank you.
Any other closing remarks by the others?
From my side, I think goodwill is obviously very important, but goodwill on a general level. My belief is that the current planning process is, if I had to say flawed, I'd be very generous. I think there needs to be a wholesome reform of the PA. There needs to be a reform in the way PA board members are appointed. There needs to be a whole process which plugs all the loopholes in the various policies, from SPED to the rural policy, to anything basically that is regulating to the local plans as well. There needs to be more transparency, because in my experience with this NGO, I have found it very, very difficult to come across information. I have to refer to journalists, I have to refer to lawyers, I have to refer to notaries, and this is not fair on the common citizen, because I have the right to know what is about to be built in my own backyard. So this is a huge challenge. There needs to be a reform of the Lands Authority. The Lands Authority is a joke. It is a black box where anyone can go lobby with a minister and they get what they like. And this has been going on and on. Ministers have resigned because of this practice at the Lands Authority, and yet it's still going on. So let us start, first of all, with transparency and with serious reforms. And we need people of a goodwill to sit in positions of planning. My personal theory is that a lot of dirty money comes in through the planning authority, because there are a lot of people who are bringing dirty monies back from Malta, and they result in these huge developments which nobody really wants to see. Developments that are out of size, out of context, completely disproportionate. Where is all this money coming from in a pandemic? So there is also no oversight at the PA level. We should also be investigating whether the people investing their money in property are investing clean money. I think the FIAU should have a role in here as well, the FIAU and the police and the MFSA. They're looking at huge sums of money, making it into our economy and being practically laundered from black economy, from black money into clean money. And we call it GDP these days. So we need to look at these things as well. And finally, policymakers have to realize that we have a dying sector on our hands, and that is farming. The situation is very serious there when it comes to farming. We've lost yet again another year where roads have cost us acres and acres of arable land. Farmers have lost their livelihoods, and all this goes on unabatedly in the name of economic growth. This is an economic growth that's not favoring the majority of the population, but it's an economic growth that is favoring the same pockets of people. Thank you.
I can pass my comment, please, as according to Mark. I think there are several aspects which we need to focus on. If we're sticking to the topic of saving ODZ, then I think there has to come a time where we need to put our foot down and say no more building on ODZ land, because if we don't put our foot down, then by time there won't be any more ODZ land to build on. Now at the end of the day, everyone has the right to invest in property, but I think everyone should be aware of the consequences they have when building on very precious land. When it comes to then land of the farmers, I think with that regard, our environmental minister needs to be more vocal and not let things pass away, I feel that when it comes to a proposal of ODZ land being taken over, I feel that he should voice his opinion and actually fight to save the land, and not just be there to have the title of a minister, but is just it's just there to be there. And moving on to my third and final point, I feel when government should reassess their perspective of taking over land for national interest, so taking over ODZ land to build a road, and instead look at ways how they can improve urbanized areas to finally improve alternative modes of transport and stop this obsession with making more rooms for cars, which eventually is basically a loop. We're going to make more rooms for cars, which will eventually result in more traffic. And once again, we ask ourselves the question, how are we going to remove the traffic? Which will once again result in taking over the land. So to conclude, I feel those are the 3 points which we as Malta should look into. And as a final point, I'd like to thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Maybe Sandro would like to add
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you ta' minnu preżenti hawnhekk kulħadd u ta' kontribut ta' kulħadd anke forsi nawrin forsi kultant nisparkjaw xi naqra ma' serra rasek li naqbel ħafna mal-affarijiet li tajtu ma naqbilx ma' affarijiet oħra speċjalment meta tindirizza l-MBA u l-nistaħħa, però għandna dritt illi ma naqblux. Il-bqija qed tagħmel ħafna xogħol tajjeb u ċertu riżultati naħseb li l-mexxinkom iġibuhom bil-mod tagħkom u kellkom ukoll protesti li fl-opinjoni tiegħi kienu kawża ġusta, kawżi ġusti u kien hemm anke responsi li għandha verament xtaqna nesprimu ruħna favur tagħkom f'ċertu affarijiet. Ovvjament mhux li hemm nagħmlu. Però aħna to cut a long story short, fl-ODZ l-MBA ma taqbilx illi nkomplu naqru iktar art għall-iżvilupp. Jiġifieri aħna niftakru dan il-gvern stess u bifer fil-2013 kienu jgħid lil-nies kollha ta' Malta biex jagħmlu submission x'ixtiequ biex jaraw fil-pjanijiet lokali li ġejjin, kien ħareġ eżempju kien hawn photos, kien hawn ħadu ritratti ta' kull imkien, ħadu stocktake ta' kull imkien, kien hemm ukoll direzzjoni politika dak iż-żmien illi jestendu ċertu artijiet illi ma kinux daħlu fil-2006, aħna konna verament voċiferi għadna kien hemm ukoll ma nkunx aħna biss jidhirli anke l-Kamra tal-Periti kienet qalet illi m'għandniex bżonn iktar art l-iskemi tal-bini. U naħseb il-battalja rbaħnija għax illum 2020 seba' snin wara l-ODZ areas l-iskim ma kibirx in 2013. To be fair ukoll qabel 2013 ma kienx hawn rural policy, kulħadd kien jibni skont minnu, anke tal-petrol stations, mingħajr ma kien hawn policy tal-petrol stations, kien hawn numru ta' petrol stations kbar, huge, illi imbnew u nħarġu permessi mingħajr policies. Kien dan il-gvern illi jiena mhux qed niddefendi l-gvern, imma tant kemm aħna wkoll ħdimna biex ikun hemm policy illi għandu jkun hemm policy li tkun ġusta tkun fair. Tgħid li kienu fair il-policies jiena rajt illi hemm bżonn fine-tuning, pereżempju fil-rural policy rajna illi kien hemm proġetti illi kienu fl-opinjoni tiegħi abbużati illi ma naqblux ma' deċiżjonijiet finali ta' ċertu proġetti fl-ODZ u nemmen illi għandna nibqgħu nagħmlu kontribut tagħna biex fl-ODZ ma jkunx hemm abbuż ta' tnaqqir ta' iktar art virgin. Jiġifieri dik hija l-policy tal-MBA u se nkunu qed naħdmu fl-interess kemm tal-ambjent u hawn naqbel ma' Bonnello illi l-environment għandu qalet illi għandu jkun fil-Kostituzzjoni qed nagħmlu m'għandix problema biha. Jiġifieri u number two aħna naħseb illi flimkien ma' ħafna oħrajn ta' rida tajba naħseb nistgħu nitfgħu il-pressure kulħadd bil-mod tiegħu to safeguard our country. That's all. Thank you.
Shall we move on to the final comments by Jack?
I think it's very clear that we need a culture change. There's no doubt about that. I think there's no doubt that a lot of these issues are cultural. There's no doubt that a lot of these issues are not unique to us. When you study planning and you study some of the points that were raised today, you know that they are issues that arise elsewhere, but definitely we need a culture change. And I think we need a culture change as well, which is based more and more on knowledge and research. We have to make more and more policy and found more and more decision-taking on proper information, on proper research, on proper design study, and so on and so forth. And of course, in that role, institutions have a very big role as champions. If they are not going to lead the way forward in terms of being champions of the people, then who is, So I think there's no doubt about that. And that's ultimately the heart of the matter, I suppose.
Perfect. Thank you all. On behalf of KSU, SACES, and S-Cubed, I would like, first of all, to thank you as our speakers today for the very valid contributions and for the interesting discussion. And also, I'd like to thank our audience who is following on Facebook for, first of all, following us and for tuning in for this webinar, and also for expressing your opinions, your comments, and your questions. Thank you, and have a good night.
Good evening.
Bye, thank you.